Hello, everyone. My name is Leilani Carbonell. I'm the VP of Account Management here at Nium for the Americas. I'm so excited to bring you some wonderful panelists today. We're going to talk about the role of emotional intelligence in effective leadership. I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to our panelists at this time so they can give a brief introduction to themselves. Let's start with Annie.
Hey there, thanks for having me today. My name is Annie Tsai. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Interact, which makes online marketing quiz software. Previously, have worked for Fortune 1000 companies as well as small startups throughout my whole career, and am a part-time investor and columnist. I have a lot of different hobbies, but my favorite hobby is empowering women in the workforce. And so it's a huge passion of mine. Thanks for having me.
Love it. Thank you so much, Annie. Mine too. I've got a passion for empowering women, and I think that that resonates with the others on the panel. Stacy, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, Leilani. Hey, everyone. My name is Stacy Mauro. I'm the VP of Eng here at Atticus. I've been part of the company since August of 2021. And our company basically helps people apply for disability benefits for free. And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about here today is very close to my heart and very important. Similar to Annie, worked at Fortune 1000, Fortune 500 companies in the past. My love is definitely within the startup space, though, because I think that's where you can make the most impact and interesting work. But super excited to be here.
Great, Stacy. Thank you for that. And I think it's so interesting, for the folks who are listening in to make sure that you check out all of the panelists like LinkedIn and their backgrounds. You're going to see a variety of backgrounds there, and which I think is really cool to note. And finally, our third panelist, Christina, go ahead and introduce yourself, please. Of course, not least.
Not least. So I'm Christina Hutchinson. I'm running sales and business development for Nium in Latin America. So I have here the challenge together with Leilani to lead the business growth of Nium in the region. Also passionate about the same topics. I go from mentoring startups to women empowerment. So I think that must have been a criteria to choose the panelists, Leilani, maybe, right? We have that in common. And also very engaged in promoting these agendas. And also a painter on my free time, and I'm a pet lover, so I'm also very involved in the third parts, say like the non-government agencies, organizations working with animals who need foster homes. So that's a little bit of
Christina. Yes, lovely. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. Just like what the panelists said, emotional intelligence, I feel like, is a really key component for not only leaders, but for everyone who's in a company. In fact, when I bring on new people onto my team, that is definitely something that I look for in a candidate, if they have that EQ or emotionally intelligent quotient. I've seen over time and in working with many folks on my team or even outside of my team, that leaders and employees who are more emotionally intelligent are more successful in their work, and also just strong collaborators all around. So I want to kick off the first question to the three of you. I will go ahead and start off maybe with Christina, if you can answer this question. How would you describe emotional intelligence in the workplace?
I would say in a nutshell, Leilani, and then Annie and Stacy, you can jump in, see if it makes sense to you guys as well. It's a little bit about what we do as leaders and as colleagues, not just leaders inside a company, but as our contribution to their own community in terms of self-awareness, empathy, social skills, relationship skills. One of the key components for me in terms of emotional intelligence, it's self-awareness. I think it starts for us understanding who we are and recognizing our own emotions and recognizing other people's emotion and where they're coming from. So that's one side of the equation. The other one is the corporate culture, right? So you need to be working on a workspace that gives you that clear guidelines especially if we're speaking about global environments, and maybe we'll drill down that a little bit more during the panel, and a little bit of the openness and the environment, the communication that allows you to foster that emotional intelligence. So that for me is a little bit in a nutshell how I read that emotional intelligence in the workforce, the workspace.
Thank you, Christina. Punting it over to Stacy, same question. How would you describe emotional intelligence in the workplace at Atticus, or or even in your past environments?
Yeah, absolutely. Mine is a slightly different spin. I think similar thematically though to Christina, where I think emotional intelligence is for me at least at the very forefront of my mind in every context. So whether I'm sitting and watching a movie and trying to get a sense of the subtext of, what's happening in a scene, if I'm listening to a song and trying to get a sense of, what emotion is it trying to evoke and do I resonate with it? Or if I'm, in a situation at work where I'm trying to surmise what's going on in a room as a meeting is happening and figuring out what's the most important priority, how do people, interpret that, and is there an actual, alignment, or is there perceived alignment, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. So I think for me, it's always at the forefront of my mind, and something that I think for sure is leveraged at Atticus, where we're dealing with folks who have disabilities, and obviously requires an intense amount of emotional intelligence to really understand a person's particular background, but also, all of our colleagues are very different, come from different walks of life, and I think that it takes a lot to really understand each other. So,
I think that what you said there, Stacey, just kind of that reading the room, and that can apply to, your work meetings or external meetings with customers, but that's something important to note and highlight. Annie, what do you think?
Yeah, it's really all of that. There is a component I think that's really, really important to emotional intelligence, and that's the ability to remove yourself from the center of the conversation. And I think as humans, especially, from birth, we are the center of our worlds. And as we become these productive adults in society and in the workforce, the more emotionally intelligent we become, the more adept we are at removing ourselves and our immediate benefit from the outcomes, from the conversation. So you can kind of expand that horizon and really get a sense as to what really are we talking about here? What really needs to happen? What really is the root cause? And the more I think work culture, as well as individually, we are able to create those experiences, the more we create an environment where people can be comfortable with being a little bit uncomfortable. And then you have safe spaces to ask questions and connect and be more productive and get better outcomes. And I think that's really, really great.
One of the things that you said, safe spaces, and I hear that over and over again, to make sure that as leaders we're creating that type of environment. So thank you for noting that point there.
And I also took notes. Sorry, Leilani, but I also took notes when you said remove yourself from the center of the conversation. There's nothing more difficult. As you said, we are born being the center. And that's why I mentioned about the self-awareness, because that's a daily exercise to make sure, because even when we think we are taking ourselves to the center, we are still maybe keeping ourselves a little bit at the center. So that's a daily exercise. I think that's part of the commitment of building that emotional intelligence and trying to lead by example and do what you're being asked to, you're going to ask others to do and you're capable of doing. So I even wrote that down, because that for me is one of the toughest one for to make sure we're doing it accurately, right? I don't know if you guys agree, but I think that's commonly the tough one, right? You need
100%,
right? To really start saying, now I'm nailing it.
I love it. 100%, because we hear about being emotionally intelligent and being empathetic, right, as making sure that you can put yourself in somebody else's shoes, right? But that also then means you're taking yourself out of your own shoes, right, to get to that. So that does resonate a lot for me. As a leader, first-time manager, way back when, I'm going to date myself, maybe over 20 years ago, I don't think I was the most emotionally intelligent person. And, you know, I've had to learn that it's not something that, like, you know, came naturally to me at first, as a manager. So had to go through some, you know, tough conversations, looking at myself and reflecting on that to be a more emotionally intelligent leader. So this leads me into my next question, and I want to start with you, Stacy, about this. Maybe if you can share a personal story about maybe one of the best leaders or any of the leaders that you've worked with, and what was it about their style or leadership that you liked?
Yeah, I was trying to think about that as you were saying it, and I think for me, one, I don't want the leaders. This is me trying to be empathetic. I don't want the leaders to fight over each other as like who is the most impactful on my life, because I think that's always a hard thing to determine. But if I go really deep on like what were the most like resonating moments that I had when a leader is speaking in the room or had a one-on-one with me and giving me like really helpful career advice, I feel like it definitely lended itself to like how emotionally intelligent is this person being in that moment? Or are they telling a story, to Christina's point, where it's like, oh yeah, like, you know, I'm not really quite talking about myself, but I kind of am, and you're still really like, oh, this is just a humble brag. Okay, this isn't really helping. Or you know, to Annie's point, is it someone that's like really actually lifting themselves out of their own perspective and making it about like, hey, like I've made these mistakes too, and this is what I learned from it. And you're probably going to keep making these mistakes, and that is okay. The point is that you move forward, not that you don't make mistakes.
Mhm.
So I think I've been really fortunate in that. I know, Leilani, you and I have worked with folks like Lane Rankin, who, you know, obviously is like a paramount character of that. I definitely currently work with a founder who's very much like that as well. And I think those are the moments that I feel locked in, where I'm like, wow, I'm receiving this gift untethered to that person's you know, center of consciousness, and it's really them just trying to, you know, pass on a piece of wisdom. So I think for me that those are the moments where I'm like, wow, okay, I am in front of a leader that I hope I can aspire to be as well.
Thank you for that. Yes, I mean, you know, and Stacey kind of just like touched on that. Like we've been fortunate. We've worked together prior to where we are now a few years ago, and had a really great empathetic leader. And one of the things that like um I hope to become, right, are leaders like that who, in a sense, you know, they make sure that their employees feel seen, right? Creating that, we've already said this before, that safe environment, but just also being seen and acknowledged. I think that that's really key. Annie or Christina, feel free to jump in if you wanted to share a personal story. Otherwise, I'll, you know, go on to my next question. I think that this is like a great
Yeah.
conversation.
I'll just add to Stacy's comment that I 100% agree. Like the really magical leaders that I have worked for and with over the years have been able to extract something out of me that I didn't know existed. And the way that they did that, you know, was always after the fact. I realized was always after the fact. It was by them listening and asking questions and being curious and being willing to admit along with me, or maybe ahead or after, that they didn't know something. And that would create it would create a window for innovation, or it would create a window for solving problems in a new way. And I think that something really magical happens there when we all allow ourselves to be a little more vulnerable than we really want to be. You know, you get promoted and you think, oh, I have to have all the answers now. But really, the most magical moments are when you don't have the answers, you know? And I love those moments so much.
Oh gosh, there's just so many good nuggets here. I'm loving it, and we could probably talk forever on that. But I'm gonna kind of flip the script a little bit now. Christina, I would love it if you could share maybe the first time that you received some negative feedback at work. How was it delivered? Was it constructive? Was it delivered poorly? What kind of impact did that make on you? And just any learnings from that experience?
I was here laughing internally because I said, I'm listening to Stacy about people leaders that empower you, and Annie's saying sometimes you just don't have the answers, right? And you have to kind of learn as you go. And it clicked. It brought me back to memory lane, one of the feedbacks that I had that really tackles on these two components. And I say memory lane because I'm speaking about over 10 years. Again, Leilani, I'm also telling people, right, how long we've been in this industry. But it was at times when people were not open with feedbacks, no mentoring. It wasn't like having these dialogues as we have today, speaking about, right, what goes right, what goes wrong, and having those gradual, open discussions in terms of mentorship. And I had a boss who was like, so the situation was the following. At the end of the year, I lost in the contract stage a very big deal for the region. So I was running the region on my previous job, and I lost a big deal that was like contracting stage. And it was a really strategic big account. So it did impact results. It impacted, right, the budget and the results we were expecting that we thought we were already on, right? How you say in English that expression, the fat lady was singing, right? I think there's an American expression, when you're almost there, right? So we were all kind of believing we were gonna succeed and close our deals and close our goals. I lost the deal. The reason why I lost the deal is that the guy who was kind of running the business on the customer's side left the bank. It was a bank. So he left the bank and I was left in the dark. So my boss at the time, he was a very blunt guy, very straightforward, very transparent, no fluffy conversations. 2 weeks later, when it happened, we closed the year and he reached me out and said, let's have a conversation about what happened. So the first thing that I thought, so I'm sharing you guys a difficult moment, right? It was tough. It was the first time in my career I had lost something, a big deal that like, how could that have happened? I was so sure I was in the finish line. And he said, look, you're not going to have the answers because if I'm going to give you a feedback, it impacted us, it impacted you, impacted results. We need to understand what happened and what we're going to do differently, right? And he gave me examples of things he might thought we could have done differently based on his experience. So I was remembering what you said, Annie, and he said, don't justify to me what happened. It is what it is. We lost the deal. So now let's breathe. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. We're going to walk through and think about what happened. You're going to come back to me in 2 days. You're going to sleep on it. And we're going to have a second conversation about what can we do differently, because we will bring this deal back, right? So it was about not having the right answers, him being a guy who understood that together we could work in solving the issue. He didn't try to fluff around saying, yes, we did have an issue, will impact our results. What can we do differently? So what I thought was very constructive, and I took that as an example that it followed me, and it was really a career change. First, what could I have done differently? I was relying on one person. You needed to do more stakeholding within the institution. Okay, since then, I always do that as a people who's running a business and in the sales side. Secondly, I always write down when I'm having a conversation about feedback or giving someone a feedback, saying, let's not try to justify and deal with all the emotions here. Let's sleep on it, because you're going to have a different perspective, and let's do a round two if it's a more complicated conversation, right? And let's do a round two so we really take the best out of this conversation. Thirdly, why I thought it was very constructive. It was very specific. He brought me examples, right? It was timely. It didn't take me 3 months to wait for my appraisal at the end, right? I don't know, March, when it happened in December. And then I'm trying to remember what happened 3 months ago. And we took action as of January. So we're going to start the year trying to bring this deal back and what we need to do to bring the deal back. Short story is that I brought the deal back 9 months later. I kind of have to, it was almost like starting from 20% of what we had done, because this guy left and I thought everything was completely structured and well-informed. Nothing was all sitting on his lap. So that was my learning curve. You have to build those stakeholders. You have to have other people. You have to understand who's your influencer, who's supporting you. You need to build a business continuity when you're speaking to enterprise deals. So that was my key learning. And the other one, as I said, is like how to communicate and have a productive conversation, taking out of lessons that you learn and and also how you deliver feedback. And even being a very tough moment, I felt very respected, right? Because it's tough when you know you could have done something different and you're impacting your whole team, right? So it's a different emotion when it's just you with your own. But I was impacting a whole team, their numbers, potential bonuses. It gives you mixed feelings, right? And he did support me. And he said, Christina, I know you're going to bring the deal back. You don't need to tell me each 3 months that you're going to bring the deal back. Because I only relaxed when I brought that deal back to the group. And they said, we already forgot about it. Move on. And I said, no, only when I get the deal back, then I'm going to be feeling I'm back in the game. And it was, that conversation was the game changer. I might have given it up and had a different attitude if it hadn't been that the 2 conversations we had and that posture. So I was having a laugh here because I thought it really resonated with what Stacy and Annie was saying about and I still use those techniques to provide feedbacks when I speak to people. It's all about how you do it. It could be a tough conversation. It's all about how you do it, right? This was one of the toughest feedback I had in my career because that was concrete. Really, I lost a big deal for the region. It wasn't like, let's change behavior. What could you have done differently? Whatever. It was something very concrete, right? And it was.
Yeah, I mean, and that's it's scary, right? And so what I'm hearing from you is that, you know, this leader, you know, you are already feeling that you already know, you know, the things that you could have done, what you shouldn't have done, and we're ready to take kind of some of those blows. And it sounded like with that leader, they already knew that you were already going through that. So why escalate that even further? And instead, you know, taking that approach of how can we move forward with this? And also, you know, giving you that knowledge or again, that feeling that it's okay to fail, right? Like, and then let's move on.
And we're speaking about 10 years ago, right, Leilani, where people didn't give you that comfort that it's okay to fail. Now we always listen, right? Working with startups, look, the principle, you fail and you respond, you fail and you respond. Yeah. That wasn't the culture, right? It had a different meaning, even for, and I think when Stacy was saying extract something positive, I did come to my mind. That was also my feeling of being empowered. He empowered me to change the game. He said, you can do it. Let's move on and do it, right? We're not going to disregard something happened, right? But we're going to get it done and we're going to change the game and we're going to learn from it. Let's move on, right? So he made me feel comfortable that we were in a good place.
I'm holding this red pen. I just pulled it out, but it just made me think of, there's this company that's called like No Red Ink. I think it's an ed tech company. And it just brings me back to my teaching days, right? And or even me as a student, when you would submit an essay and you see a lot of red ink, again, dating myself because I don't even know if they do that anymore. They probably just do everything on computer, but like that red ink and all of the things that you did wrong. And I talked about earlier how when I was a first-time manager, and I admit I didn't have a high EQ. And I remember one of the employees who worked with me, she went and she did a presentation in front of a large group. It was her first time. And then, you know, she asked for my feedback and I started with all of the red ink and I saw the tears in her eyes. I mean, that was so bad. So I feel like that I have evolved very much from that. But it does take work, and it does also, you know, allow yourself to reflect on yourself as a leader and what you could do. But I just remember, and it still sticks with me, and I never want to make somebody feel that way again because it's terrible, right? Stacy or Annie, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I just wanted to affirm that appreciate someone with as much experience as you and everyone else in this room are willing to be vulnerable and talk about these things. Because I think, you know, if you looked at all of our resumes, everyone would be like, oh my God, like these are incredible people. Like they must clearly not make mistakes. And so it's actually really nice and refreshing to kind of acknowledge, like, you know, that we're all still figuring things out too. And it's yeah, just wanted to say that. But nothing else to add.
Thank you, Stacy. And since then, I have not lost big deals. Maybe I didn't win them for another reason, but not lost them at the end of the game. I lost them before.
So something interesting that I learned in my conversations with Annie is that and we've also heard this around the idea of a 4-day work week. And so I'd like Annie, I'd love for you to share that with us about that 4-day work week and how it supports your workplace in being more, empathetic to your employees.
Yeah, we started with the language of 4-day work week because it was really a test to see if the team would be able to maintain or improve productivity and outcomes with fewer sort of gross hours, right? Absolute hours. However, over the last 2 years, we've shifted the language a little bit to more flexible schedules. And the reason for that is because it's not really about the hours that you work and when you work them. It's about having control over your time. And there's a cognitive shift there that I think psychologically is really, really important for employees. We don't have to be butts in seats all the time. Especially in this new world that, where many companies are multinational, we're talking with people in Brazil right now, and I'm sitting in the Bay Area, and, we could be working collaboratively on projects 24/7, and you don't need to be in the same room to do that. And in those environments and in these really great workplaces, we can get a lot done with less time, and also with the technology support that we have. And so, the 4-day work week was really to test whether or not we could improve outcomes. And we did. So we went to, the notion of flexible schedules / 4-day work weeks. And we said, these are your outcomes. This is what we're striving to do as a company. These are our goals. And, when you do them, we want to make sure that everyone's working around these hours so we can have meetings, but, we actually don't really have that many meetings. Brush your fingers. That continues.
Lucky you.
Yeah, good luck. So these are the hours that we have meetings, and we want to be available for each other. But outside of that, and we also don't care what you work, as long as you pick a place where you pay taxes that we can support. And so we have folks that will spend 6 months in one country and 3 months in another country and whatever, and we don't care. But they're reporting out every week on their activities. They're driving partnerships. They're driving go-to-market. They are building product and supporting our infrastructure. We're talking to customers through our tools, and it's just working. And so we hit our goals and we grow, but the team feels like they have control over their lives and their time. They don't feel beholden. They feel like they want to do it, and they want to be a part of this thing that's growing, and that they are not sort of, a slave to the man is how we talk about it. And so we shifted away from 4-day work week because it's not really just about working 4-day 9 hours, right? It's about working when it makes sense to work. And I think that language is also really, really great for integrated work-life balance, right? And I really have shifted away from calling it work-life balance, and I call it more work-life integration because, later on today, I'm going to go to my son's music concert in the middle of the workday, but then I'm going to come back to work and finish up and probably do some stuff this evening and over the weekend when it makes sense to. And I think all of us sort of inherently live that life, but we really want to talk about living that life and have it be a part of our culture, because it makes, I think, team members more invested in the company and appreciate more also that this doesn't exist everywhere, and acknowledge and identify it as something that you want to look for in your roles, because that's also something that people get kind of blindsided about when they take a new job and don't realize that, oh, my company thinks I'm going to be a butt in a seat from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day in this office,
Yeah, I mean, I think that just one of the things that the pandemic has taught us, right, is that it can work, right? When we all had to work remotely, and things, life went on, businesses went on, and I think that that was, a good outcome out of that for a very, terrible situation. So, here at Nium, I mean, we work in office 3 days in office and then two days remotely. But there's also that flexibility, right? I mean, we're all human, and we've got human responsibilities. Like you said, Annie, I mean, you're gonna, you need to go to an for one of your children. And for me as a mother of four, I mean, that's really critical for me too, because things happen. I have dentist appointments, my kids have dentist appointments, so being able to have that flexible working schedule is really something that I really appreciate here at where I work.
And also the generations, like the current generations, former previous generations, they are moving towards that type of, how many times you see people saying, I'm not going to work here if that's the principle is not allow us to have that flexibility and accountability, right? And we will get things done, but we need to kind of build on that. And you mentioned work balance integration, which also involves mental health, right? It goes back to also how you're balancing that equation. And I think it's quite driven by the fact that now you have the tools to do that. And I see, at least here in Brazil, I don't know if the same is happening globally, and I would say more I know about Latin America, is that many people are giving up good jobs if they don't allow you to have that flexibility on how you're building your calendars and working more related to your outcomes than just, I'm going to be here from 9 to 5 and everyone's going to see me here and that's all I'm going to do and that's it, right? 5 times a week, no flexibility, right? I see a lot of talents being driven apart, like going towards another direction because of those, when companies are still trying to impose that. That's why the shift is also coming in terms of we're going to understand that things change, that it has changed.
Yeah, it has to. And right.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, you mentioned something, Christina, that's really important to call out, which is the flexibility also needs to come with accountability. And without those two things, it doesn't work. But yeah, when they come together, and when there's trust involved, mutual trust involved, just really, really great things can happen.
And people will learn. It doesn't take long for you to understand if people, even if you're not seeing them, if the accountability is there, right? You can build ways of trying to, maybe it'll take you 1 month longer, but eventually you will understand if that accountability is there, right? And I think if you're surrounded by a culture that brings that accountability as part of what you should be doing, that community will also think that other people you're working with, you want them to be accountable as well. You don't want them to be, right? So you kind of build that type of commitment from your peers and how you're building your teams, right? I'm a believer that you can build that sense of responsibility, right? Of an identity around the culture.
Right. I mean, having trust in your people, there's a lot of mileage on that. Stacy, I'd love to hear your thoughts just about, what do you think about working in a diverse and inclusive working environment, and how does that play a role at promoting emotional intelligence? And then also, Christina, you had touched upon this, you're in Brazil, and so we also do, I know that I work with folks around the world, and so what are some of those kind of considerations, thinking of, again, Stacy, about diversity and inclusiveness and working with global counterparts around the world?
Yeah, I'd say for the diversity and inclusion component, I think that when you do look for the best possible team members of your team, you'll naturally get a large variety of different experiences and backgrounds. And I think that the emotional intelligence needed to not only curate hiring practices that can enable that, but also, performance management aspects where that you can enable the best ideas and the most creative solutions to come to fruition, requires that ability, right, to promote that emotional intelligence. It almost feels like a never-ending cycle. Like you put in the work to create that space, you have these people, those people are then going to inform your own emotional intelligence over time as you start to realize that different communities and different lived experiences breed different ideas around like, what is respect? What is transparency? What are these like larger aspects of values that we all share inherently, but that we might name differently or codify in different actions. And I think that's how I've seen that really play a role in every startup or every company that I've been at. And that ultimately from those very people that you wanted to bring into the room, you're now then forced to become an even better, emotional, intelligent person as a result. So sorry, that kind of fell a little high level, but that was the thing that was top of mind for me.
No, that's great. That's great. Christina, I hate to put you on the spot, but I will because you're out in Brazil and we're over here in the US. But just your thoughts about working in global environments.
I would make a parallel, a very like segue what Stacy was saying, what you called community, like people understand different values in different respects. I would change the world culture. People come from different countries, so they come from different backgrounds. And I've been exposed to many situations because when you're working in a global company, being in Brazil, you're always kind of exposed to projects. Their enterprise project will come from US, they'll be in UK, they will, and even working in companies that the employees and in Asia, in US, UK, in LATAM. It's about understanding that culture drives the business. And now I speak about culture in terms of people's background and where they come from, right? Not the organizational culture. And you have to understand, have an active listening and understand those diverse perspectives. What you understand to be respect is not the way they learn respect. Silly examples. If you start a meeting in Brazil, and Leilani knows that because she came once, and you jump straight to the meeting and you don't warm up, it's seen as a sense of disrespect. If you go to the same meeting in US and you small talk for 3 minutes and you think you're wasting people's time, it might be seen as you're not respecting the senior leader's time that he's here on this call. It might yes happen, might not happen, but I've seen it happen. For example, like, okay, now time to start. Let's jump into the discussion. In Europe, you ask about the weather, and then we are in you need to warm up. In Latin America, it's more relational. You ask about the weather, how things are going, then you jump into the conversation, right? Very standardized small talk. So I think that gives an example how people would understand if they're being respected, if values around the time management, if we're being professional, if we're being high performers. Just by this small example, I've seen many negotiations and discussions, and I always bring up the impact of the culture while you're building businesses or why you're dealing with people. Because, for example, if you give another example, and I'll focus more on people, right? Not less on deals. If you speak openly and give open feedback, congratulations, this was fantastic, this was wow. In States, that's super well received. How nice they're openly giving me, praising my good work. If you do it in Europe, you might get a lot of people uncomfortable because you say, but that's part of our job, that's part of a day-to-day business. It's not good luck or just it happened. We are prepared to get that done. This is just business as usual. You might make people feel embarrassed, right? So they don't like this open feedback that they kind of don't know where you're coming from, depending on the country. I also, again, like Stacy said, I'm just giving you a very generic example. You could debate, depending on each country in Europe, it will be different, right? But these are just examples that show that what seemed to be very natural on one end, if you don't understand where people are coming from, it won't. And I think this also involves in terms of emotional intelligence, right? Understanding where you are, where people are coming from. I had a teacher at the MBA once who said, if you want to close a good deal, understand their background. Where do these people come from in terms of their background, where their family, where their surname, because you will understand how they were brought up. Right, and then you'll understand the language you had to use. And I said that's especially in conflict resolution, because we also spoke about the good side of having emotional intelligence. We didn't touch about when you're dealing with conflicts, how you use that emotional intelligence, right? And he said always understand where people are coming from, because then you're going to understand what's their language, what's their understand the audience from a complete perspective, and then you'll understand a little bit of their values and their beliefs, right? And I took that as also another, that was a more academic feedback, right? Learning, not the feedback. I said, oh,
well, I'm I'm going to start. I'm going to continue on that train about like some, academic feedback, if you will, in terms of like looking at the research, right? So just have a data point here that the demands for emotional intelligence skills across all industries are expected to grow by 26% in the US and 20% in Europe by 2030. So kind of keeping that in mind, and I'm sure that in other regions we're seeing that same trend. So Annie, piggybacking on that, if people skills are essential, being more emotionally intelligent, what kind of advice can you give as a leader, a hiring manager? How do you assess that during that interview stage if you want to get more folks with those types of skills?
I find that I am able to really get into EQ and EI when we start talking about really hard things, when we start getting uncomfortable. And it can be challenging in an interview environment to do that because, people always feel like they're being tested or graded based or judged based on what they're saying. And so I always like to start with an example to make them more comfortable, and sort of open with vulnerability. So I would ask a question. Typically, it's a situational type of question targeted towards the role. I'll give them an example of something that I have done in the past that is, probably extremely embarrassing to make them feel a little more comfortable in opening up. As an example, and that sort of sets the tone that it's okay. Maybe we laugh a little bit about it, because you really want to get a sense as to who people are as people, not who they are as interviewees, and it's a hard thing to do. Interviewing is really hard, and skills assessment is really hard. And so, I applaud the human resources and people operations organizations for evolving as much as they have over these years in trying to figure out, how do we best assess for emotional intelligence. I think we're all still kind of testing it out. That's one way in which I've been able to do it with the roles that I've hired for.
Yeah, I think, and I think we've talked about this here. I think you, Annie, you mentioned that a little bit earlier on, and just being vulnerable. So feel vulnerable with your current team, and I love that, being with that, showing that vulnerability also in the interview process, because we've all been through that, and it's nerve-wracking. You are spending hours preparing, and you got that one shot, right? And so as an interviewer, you have to take that with a grain of salt, and also just give those interviewees some grace around that. And for me, like I agree with you, and I do like to look at questions that kind of tap into that. Are they being vulnerable themselves? Like, are they able to, when there's like a typical question that might be asked about, tell me about a time that you have had, a difficult conversation with somebody that you've worked with, right? And getting that example and try to suss out, like, are some of those do you see those people skills coming out through that?
I also like asking questions about things that are very unrelated to jobs in general. Like I like asking them things like, when you're thinking about what you're going to make for dinner, do you look up a recipe, or do you open your fridge and see what's available? How do you like to cook? When you're thinking about what you're going to read next, what's your process? Because, part of emotional intelligence is also how they think, right? And so I learn a lot about people with those kinds of questions.
I love that. I'm writing that down with my, red pen. That's really great. Stacy, do you have a typical question, a favorite question that you ask to kind of gauge that emotional intelligence?
Yeah, well, first I wanted to plus one what Annie just said in terms of like, I think when you're the hiring manager and you allow yourself to be vulnerable and you exemplify that in the actual, sorry, excuse me, my voice is going away, and you exemplify that in the actual interview process, I think that shows such a great way of like setting the tone for the culture that you expect. Because you want that level of vulnerability and that willingness to engage, because obviously there are going to be hard times in the job, and you want to be able to trust that this is someone you want to be in the trenches with. So I can't say enough about that. I think that's such an excellent way of really just getting a sense of how the other person can operate, and also mirroring the kind of behavior you'd like to see. In terms of questions, it's actually kind of similar to Annie. I haven't done the recipe one yet. I'm also going to percolate on that and see if I can't use it. But we definitely at my current company really, really care about the origin story of someone. So we ask a lot of like, when take us back to when you were in high school, and like when you were deciding, do I want to go to college? What college do I want to go to? What do I want to study? Like, what was your thought process? And I think that similarly kind of gives that sentiment of like, even when you're young and didn't have a ton of experience, right? Because all of us in high school, we're not very experienced. How did you figure out these big life decisions? Because I think that is very like a common experience that all of us have. And then kind of that same thread asking why they picked the jobs. So it's been really interesting. Instead of using more of like what was your job and specifically all the different details, because depending on the role that might not be as pertinent in a hiring manager conversation. I want to know why you did those things, right? Like, why did you make those decisions? Why did you go to that company? So I love what Annie said about that. I think that really helps fine tune those pieces.
Yeah, I am so glad that post this conversation that we are actually going to draft this into a post where we can get all of those that advice there. So really great thoughts here from the three of you today. This was such a great conversation. I want to end it with just going around the room and just kind of giving some quick advice. Quick advice of like you're speaking to other managers, leaders out there. What is some quick advice you could give to them to build their emotional intelligence? So, Christina, can I start with you for just giving like that quick nugget of advice, please?
I would say lead by example. I always use that as my personal guidance. And I think it really resonated with what Annie and Stacy were saying as well, and you, Leilani, about like the examples of so treat people how you want to be treated and lead by example. If you're doing it right or doing it wrong, there's a consistency that builds trust in your behavior, right? And secondly, be humble. To wrap up, and we spoke about showing ourselves as vulnerable. We all been there, right? People look at you and maybe they're going to mirror you because they're maybe in the younger beginning, right? From their career, or maybe they want to learn from you for a different reason. We didn't come ready. It's not a package that we open and it's, oh, look, everything looks fantastic, right? It's being built. So I think that also brings a little bit about being humble that others are building as well, right? And we will be building, hopefully until we die, right? On a daily basis, we are open to new learning. So it's an ending process. And I think having that mindset helps us also keep our responsibility and accountability, our impact we have on others,
Great advice. Annie, what's your quick advice?
I think the mindset of being a student is really, really important, because no matter where we are in our careers, there is always going to be something to learn. And so, and I think earlier in my career, I thought I was much smarter than I do now. And I think maybe we're all that way. I don't know, but I thought I had all the answers and I very clearly did not. And the older I get, the fewer answers I have. And the more I seek out to learn. And I think, that mindset has really helped me in my life. And I think that would be the only thing.
Yeah, that just makes me think of having that growth mindset, always learning. Definitely agree. Stacy, I'd love to close it out with you. What's some quick advice that you can tell our audience on how to build their emotional intelligence?
Yeah, I think we talked about a bit. I think having the self-awareness of what you want to improve upon. And then I would say go find those people that are excellent at those things. like I definitely am going to hit all of you up in this room for various things because I think you all clearly have strengths in certain ways that I lack. And I think once you allow that vulnerability to percolate, you realize that we are part of a singular community, whether in the workspace or in family life or wherever. And I think that's so exciting, to Annie's point too, about like if you get to be a student, that means you get to learn all the time. And how cool is that? So
I'm a lousy cook, so if you guys want to teach me how to cook, so I don't even have the courage of bringing that question because people might come back to me saying, "What about you?" And I'm going to say, "I don't even know how to." Right?
That's your
Put a
vulnerability.
toast in the toaster.
I love it.
I know, shows your vulnerability. Well, everyone, this has been such a great discussion, conversation. Love that you've shared your thoughts here, and I think that this will, go a long way in terms of helping others out. So thank you all for your input here and being part of this panel. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all so much.
Likewise, I really had a good time. Learned a lot.
Thank
So
you.
Stace, I also learned from you guys and Annie. So please let's connect, because otherwise I'm going to be very heartbroken if we don't connect and keep the learning curve, right?
Okay.